The internet loves a good Daytona Killer headline, and the Seiko Speedtimer is usually the one they're pointing at. But let's be real for a second, it isn't. What you're actually looking at is a 14.6mm thick hockey puck that comes with a built-in quality control lottery. But it also happens to cost $34,000 less than the Rolex. Today, we're going to be looking at Grail watches and their budget alternatives to find out exactly where that massive price gap lives. These alternatives, they aren't garbage, but they're very different bets whenever it comes to finishing, QC risk, and whether or not you care about bracelet shimmer. We're breaking this down across 4 pillars: overall finishing, movement quality, the risk of a lemon, and how well the watch holds its value. We have to start with the Rolex Daytona, reference number 126500LN. Inside is the Calibre 4131, a dedicated in-house chronograph that carries superlative chronometer certification. That means the watch is guaranteed to run between -2 and +2 seconds per day, and Rolex doesn't just test the movement on the bench, they test it after the entire watch is cased up. The case itself is an architectural masterpiece at only 11.9mm thick, featuring a hand-assembled column wheel that ensures zero stutter when you hit the pusher. You get Paraflex shock absorbers and a secondary market price that currently hovers around $36,500. While a service is going to run you about $1,600 every few years, you're paying for a standard where rate stability isn't just a suggestion, it's the law. Now let's take a look at the bridge. The Seiko Speedtimer, it uses the Calibre 8R48, which is technically in-house, but this is where the term starts to get a little soft. Seiko manufactures this movement at an industrial scale, focusing on mass production efficiency rather than artisanal precision. The vertical clutch and column wheel represent solid engineering, but the quality control philosophy is worlds apart from what you're going to see at Rolex. Seiko's post-assembly tolerances allow for a window of +25 to -15 seconds per day, which is a massive canyon compared to the Rolex's tight 4-second spread. When the 8R48 eventually needs a service, Seiko isn't going to sit there and repair every individual component. They're going to just swap the entire movement because the labor cost to hand adjust that vertical clutch actually costs more than a brand new Calibre. The Rolex 4131 is a different story because every single component can be repaired individually, meaning that your grandkid's grandkid could get this watch serviced a century from now. The Seiko, it's built for durability and utility, but it lacks that heirloom repairability that defines high-end horology. You're looking at about a $2,500 price tag and service costs around $500, mainly because you're buying a replacement engine rather than a restoration. The real headache is that 40-second variance window, which means you might get a watch that's rock solid at -8 seconds, or you might get the one that's pushing +18 seconds. The breakdown is pretty clear when you look at the facts. Rolex delivers a case with surgical polishing and brushing, while the Seiko is competent, but it feels machine uniform. The Daytona, it trades at 250% of its retail price, jumping from $15,000 to over $36,000 on the secondary market, whereas the Speedtimer usually holds about 40% of its value. You're saving $34,000 with the Seiko, but you're inheriting that thick case and the classic Seiko alignment gamble. Now I know the Seiko fans are already hitting the keyboard, but we have to be objective here. Let me know in the comments at what point a chronograph becomes too thick to wear, because at the end of the day, you have to decide. Now we're moving into some serious heavy territory where the stakes are much higher. The Daytona versus the Speedtimer was mostly about the QC lottery and the case thickness. This comparison is on a different planet. This is where hand finishing stops being just precision engineering and actually transcends into high art. The absolute grail here is the Lange Söhne Datograph, featuring the Calibre L951.6. With its 451 individual components, these movements are actually assembled twice by master watchmakers. After that first pass, the entire movement is completely disassembled, cleaned, and reassembled a second time, specifically so they can focus on the finishing and decoration. That double assembly process is the hallmark of their artisanal peak, and frankly, the finishing is just insane. Each individual engraver imparts their own specific style, whether it's deep interlaced patterns or precise 4-petal designs. No two finishes are identical, and that's by design. When the secondary market sits around $102,000 and service costs you about $4,200, you expect this level of specialized labor. Every single movement is inspected by a master craftsman because this isn't about assembly line tolerances, it's about hands-on individuality. The bridge to that level of quality is Glashütte Artisanal Senator Chronograph, which uses the in-house Calibre 37-01 with 65 jewels. It's hand-assembled with standards that are genuinely impeccable, featuring Glashütte striping on a 3/4 plate and hand-engraved cocks and gold chattons. You get blued screws and polished steel parts throughout, and let's be honest, this is high-quality work that is genuinely excellent. But here's the distinction. The Geo is standardized and refined to a state of perfection. Its industrial finishing elevated as high as it can go, but it lacks the intentional artisanal variation that defines a Lange. On the secondary market, you're looking at about $13,500 with service costs between $1,800 and $2,200, and the QC risk is basically zero. Their process is repeatable and reliable, so you know you're getting the exact same quality with every single movement that they ship. When we look at the trade-offs, the ALS black polishing and relief engravings are labor-intensive art forms that require years of specialized training. Geo striping and bluing are high-quality standards executed flawlessly, but Lange takes 2 to 3 times longer per movement just to handle the finishing alone. Both are exceptional pieces of engineering, so the difference isn't about mechanical integrity, it's about the sheer depth of that personalized hand finishing. While the Geo is bulletproof with predictable tolerances, the Datagraph's individual engravings means no two watches are ever the same. The Datograph trades at 100% of its $102,000 MSRP, while the Senator, it holds about 55% of the value, but you're saving a massive $89,000 in capital. The Geo's movement is genuinely beautiful and will likely outlast collectors, and the finishing is exceptional by any reasonable standard you apply. When you get these under a macro lens, the gap between the hand polishing and machine brushing hits you like a ton of bricks. Look at that black polishing and relief engraving on the ALS because it catches the light reactively in a way that machine work just can't mimic. The light actually dances across the surface as you rotate the watch, and that happens because every single angle was finished by a human hand to slightly different degrees. We call that shimmer, and it's the soul of high-end watchmaking. Now, on the other hand, the machine striping from the Geo is uniform, refined, and completely predictable. It's static rather than reactive. While both watches look equally stunning at arm's length on your wrist, the macro lens tells a different story. You're witnessing the massive divide between artisanal soul and standardized perfection. If you can't see the shimmer or it doesn't move the needle for you, then the $89,000 price difference just became entirely optional. Now we're getting into the most visible part of the game, which is the integrated bracelet where the finishing lives on your wrist every day. The Audemars Piguet Royal Oak 15510 ST carries the Calibre 4302 with 257 components, and it's hand assembled to give you a 70-hour power reserve. But the real story isn't the movement, it's the bracelet architecture with hand-polished bevels on every single link edge. You get alternating satin brushed and polished center links, plus mirror polished side facets that grab the light and refuse to let it go. You're looking at $44,000 on the secondary market and a service bill that's gonna suck $2,500 to $3,500 right out of you. But every link is inspected for fit and polish consistency, which is a level of obsession that you can only get at this price point. The bridge to this world is the Nivada Gretchen F77, which runs a Soprod P024 movement that serves as a solid 25 jewel workhorse with a 38-hour power reserve. The integrated bracelet is made of solid 316L stainless steel, but the brushing is machine uniform and there isn't a single hand-polished bevel in sight. The case is stamped and finished by a machine rather than a master craftsman, so you aren't getting those sharp hand-chamfered edges. It sits around a $2,000 price point with a $500 service cost, but here's the risk that you're going to take. Bracelet alignment can vary from piece to piece, and some units can ship with loose end links or uneven brushing across the links. Let's take a look at the trade-offs because the finishing gap is absolutely stark. The hand-polished bevels on the AP create a light play that feels alive, while the F77's machine work feels uniform and static. The AP 4302 is a refined masterpiece engineered over decades, whereas the Soprod is just a reliable engine built for daily utility. One is an heirloom and the other is a tool. But the QC risk is where it gets real. AP's tolerances are surgical and every piece is inspected individually. But the F77's mass production means you might end up with some loose bracelets. When it comes to the money, the Royal Oak trades at over 150% of its retail price, while the F77 is holding about 35% of its value. You're saving $42,000, but you have to decide if you can live with the difference. The F77 is a competent, solid, modern tool watch, but the Royal Oak is haute horology and steel. It isn't about specs on paper, it's about execution on the wrist. The F77 is a great re-edition of the 1977 original, but the Royal Oak is king, refined to absolute perfection. 3 watches into this, and we've managed to keep $165,000 in our pockets. Think about that for a second, because that's a Porsche 911 Carrera or a massive down payment on a house sitting right there. You could buy 5 incredible daily wear watches for that kind of money instead of sinking them into a single heirloom piece. The question is getting a lot heavier now, and you have to ask if that final finishing is actually worth an $87,000 premium. Let's shift gears and look at something different, because the last 3 comparisons were all about chronographs or complex movements and designs. Now we're diving into material science versus traditional mechanics with the Cartier Santos. This case is 40.8 millimeters wide and runs on the Calibre 1847 MC, which is Cartier's in-house movement named after the year the company was founded. It's anti-magnetic up to 1200 Gauss thanks to the soft iron shield and paramagnetic nickel phosphorus parts. And the movement features 23 joules with about a 40-hour power reserve. Every single watch gets individual regulation after it's cased, and the finishing is surgical with a mix of polish and satin brush surfaces. On the secondary market, these trade for about $7,700, but a service is going to run you anywhere between $1,500 and $2,000. Now take a look at the Rado True Square, which is a 38mm powerhouse made of high-tech ceramic. It uses the Calibre R763, which is an ETA variant that Rado upgraded with a Nevacron anti-magnetic hairspring to give you a massive 80-hour power reserve. Instead of traditional machining or stamping, this case is actually injection molded ceramic, which gives you scratch resistance and anti-magnetic properties without needing a heavy iron cage. You can find these on the secondary market for about $2,300, and the service costs you about $400. The execution philosophies here are night and day, because you're choosing between Cartier's hand-finished steel and Rado's industrial ceramic. While the Santos holds about 70% of its value compared to the Rado's 40%, you're saving about $4,900 right out the gate. You aren't trading away precision for a better price, you're just trading old school prestige for modern material science. Here's where the Rado breaks away from the Cartier in a way that actually matters to your wallet. When that Rado movement eventually fails, the Swatch Group isn't going to sit there and repair it, because their business model is built on swapping the whole unit out. You aren't paying for a master watchmaker to perform a restoration, you're essentially paying for a brand new engine to be dropped into the chassis. Now compare that to the Cartier 1847 MC, which offers true component level repairability, where a worn balance spring or a loose jewel can be addressed individually. The Cartier's movement lives on as a piece of machinery you service, while the Rado is treated more like a disposable unit that you replace wholesale once it stopped ticking. Now, I'm not saying the Rado is cutting corners here, but they've clearly built the R763 for pure utility and long-term durability rather than horological romance. Their philosophy is built around appliance maintenance instead of heirloom repairability, so you need to be honest with yourself about why you're buying it. If you pick up a Rado expecting a piece of history to hand down to your grandkids, you're looking at the wrong watch. But if you want bulletproof reliability for the next decade, it's exactly the right tool for the job. Now we're moving into dress sport territory with watches that blur the line between formal elegance and raw functional power. So let's take a look at the Patek Philippe Aquanaut, the 5167A, which houses the Calibre 26330SC with its 212 individual components. Now, what actually matters here is the Patek Seal Standards, which mandates a 100% inspection of every single component before the watch even touches an assembly bench. Every single piece is tested as a fully assembled unit rather than just checking the movement in isolation, and they demand an accuracy of -3 to +2 seconds a day. Patek also offers a lifetime serviceability guarantee, meaning that any watch made since 1839 can be brought back to factory spec, which is an obsessive quality control you just can't find in standard luxury brands. The case finishing features hand-polished chamfers on the edges, and the composite rubber strap is molded specifically to the case geometry for a seamless fit. Of course, that level of detail means the secondary market is trading about $53,000, and a standard service is going to run you about $2,500. Bridge to this high-end world is the Mido Multifort TV Big Date, a watch measuring about 40 millimeters by 39.2 millimeters that runs on the Calibre 80 movement. Now, this movement is based off the ETA C07.621 and offers a massive 80-hour power reserve along with an Evercron balance spring to keep things steady. The case is stamped from 316L stainless steel and features machine brush surfaces, so don't go looking for any hand-applied chamfering on those edges. You get a blue to black gradient dial with the horizontal brush finishes and a big date complication sitting at the 12 o'clock position. While the composite rubber strap is perfectly functional, it isn't molded to the case geometry like the Patek. And the secondary market is going to reflect that with a price tag around $1,300. Mido relies on industrial quality control standards, which means they use that sampling method for their inspections instead of testing every single unit that leaves the factory. Because of this, you can see slight variations in bracelet alignment or dial printing consistency, and you certainly aren't going to get that lifetime serviceability guarantee beyond the typical 2-year warranty. When we break down these trade-offs, the finishing on the Patek's hand-polished edges versus the Mido's machine-stamped case, it's like comparing night and day again. The Patek's movement is a hand-assembled masterpiece built to satisfy an internal obsession, while the Mido Calibre 80 is a solid value-driven platform that actually it beats most automatics on paper. You have to accept some QC risks with the Mido because their industrial standards might leave you with some uneven brushing or fit variations that Patek, they simply wouldn't allow. Now, the value retention is where things get crazy, as the Aquanaut trades at about 213% of its retail price, jumping from $25,000 MSRP to a market price of over $53,000. Meanwhile, the Multifort TV holds about 92% of its value, but you're saving over $52,000 in capital by choosing the Mido over the Patek. The Aquanaut is a masterclass in dynamic minimalism where every surface is finished to respect its purpose, while the Multifort TV leans into vintage nostalgia. It does a great job of invoking that 1970s vibe, but it lacks the artisanal labor that made the original high-end sports watches so special in the first place. Everyone loves to call the Seiko Speedtimer a Daytona Killer. We've spent this time taking a look at the facts, and the Daytona is objectively the superior machine because it offers better finishing, uncompromising quality control, and component-level repairability. But here's something that matters across all 5 comparisons. You just kept $222,000 in your pocket. That isn't some rounding error. That's a serious financial commitment that changes your entire life. Now, for 90% of the collectors out there, buying the alternative isn't a compromise. It's actually the smarter move. You get a competent watch that handles daily wear without requiring you to justify a $150,000 wrist check to your spouse or your accountant. Now, that massive premium on the Grail, it buys you obsessed QC and heirloom serviceability. But those things only matter if they align with you and how you actually wear your watches. Now, the real question isn't whether the affordable option beats the icon, it's whether you truly understand the trade that you're making. Once you see that trade clearly, you can make the call that fits your life. Make sure you subscribe for our next video breakdown and check out the other video where the affordable alternatives actually beat the luxury icon. Take care, and I'll see you next time.